Have you ever felt as if you cannot quite describe a presence in your life? Events when everything appeared unclear, but nonetheless things turned out in ways that were too perfect to be simple coincidences? Whether they acknowledge them or not, many individuals on their paths of religion report that they are under divine protection. Though we cannot see or feel it personally, the concept that there is a greater force directing and protecting us has great consoling effect. Sometimes the symptoms are little, and we overlook them as we are so preoccupied with the turmoil of life. Other times, however, they are plain and unambiguous, offering hope and comfort when most needed. Think back to those moments when you were in a trying circumstances that looked unbreakable yet, out of the blue, an unanticipated fix showed up. Perhaps it was a health concern, financial struggle, or relationship problem. Something changed just when you were ready to quit up, and suddenly things began to turn around. Maybe it was a buddy extending just what you needed, or a chance meeting altering your whole viewpoint. During such times, it's simple to write off the result as chance or sheer luck. But what if it were anything more? Imagine if it were a clear indication that a heavenly presence was steering you away from danger and onto the proper road, thus underlining your safety. With this insight, there is a certain calm. It's about recognizing that, within those difficulties, you are not alone. Not about expecting life to be free from hardships. You are under protection in ways you may not yet grasp yet. And often the most obvious indicators of that protection show up when we are most vulnerable, that of almost giving up or losing hope. We should be particularly conscious at such times because, if we are not paying carefully, it is easy to ignore the modest signs of heavenly protection. Consider the last time you felt strongly in your gut that something was off, even if there was no rational basis for it. Perhaps it was a warning about someone in your life, or maybe a sensation of discomfort about a choice you were about to make. Although at the time that sensation appeared illogical, looking back you find it to be exactly accurate. That is not just intuition. It is direction, a kind of protection watching out for you and urging you on the proper path. Sometimes we see divine protection as something spectacular and clear, like being spared a car accident or just barely avoiding a calamity. Usually, however, it is much less than that. It's the quiet voice within, the sensation of peace that envelopes you when you're nervous, or the abrupt clarity when everything seemed confused before. It is crucial to realize that this protection does not imply that negative events cannot occur. Struggles and tribulations abound in life. Under divine protection, however, implies that hand leading you through even the toughest of times. Though invisible, there is always a path out. And sometimes the best defense is resilience, that capacity to keep on, to bear, and to come out on the other side stronger. You appear to be being strengthened for what is ahead, ready to meet obstacles with a force that seems to emanate from something far more than yourself. Some individuals say they experience great tranquility even if everything around them is disintegrating. Knowing that, in spite of all the turmoil, they will be okay is an odd and somewhat contradictory emotion. This serenity is presence of protection, not the absence of problems. This form of calm is the one that resists comprehension as it does not depend on surroundings being ideal. Rather, it stems from the understanding that they are not journeying alone. Whatever occurs, nevertheless they cannot completely understand it. They are being sheltered in ways they cannot entirely appreciate. They believe that protection exists nevertheless. Interestingly is that sometimes the protection we get does not manifest itself as things as they should be. Sometimes the most obvious indicators of heavenly protection are the very doors closing, the chances lost, or the relationships ending. Though sometimes the true shields are the suffering, the heartache, and the mistakes, we usually see protection as something that keeps us safe from harm. It's difficult to perceive that way when we find ourselves too near to a problem, but with time and perspective it becomes obvious. Those were all kinds of protection. That job you missed and the relationship that fell apart were others. Though you may not have recognized it then, you were being directed away from events that would have caused more damage than benefit. Things were not intended for you. The lovely thing about divine protection is that it always works, even when we are not aware of it. It's like a safety net, catching us when we fall and guiding us when we veer too far from the road of least deviation. The secret, however, is being receptive to perceive it and identifying the indicators when they show up. Since the fact is that such indicators surround us daily, we only need to calm down, pay attention, and believe that something much more expansive than ourselves is looking over us. It's easy to get trapped in the daily grind as you negotiate life, and to concentrate on what is going wrong rather than what is going well. But you will find such instances of divine intervention everywhere when you start to search for the indicators and pay close attention to those times. Though they may not always show up the way you would like, they are there, guiding, shielding, and making sure you never really are alone. It is evident when we learn more about how divine protection shows itself in our life that these graceful moments are not necessarily spectacular or noticeable. Usually, more often than not, they are silently underneath in the very fabric of our everyday life. Often the most obvious indicators of God's hand leading us are in the minute details and in the times we pass over or take for granted. Spend some time considering your life, and you will probably find a trend. Perhaps a professional change, a romance, or even a financial investment. Maybe a period when you had an extreme feeling of anxiety or doubt about a big choice. Just when you felt lost in the muddle, clarity materialized in an unexpected way. It can have come from the counsel of a friend, a chapter from a book, or even something as basic as a gut sense guiding you on the right path. Everything changed at that moment. That clarity was not accidental. It was the calm direction you needed, the shield keeping you from stepping down the incorrect road. What then about the occasions when our expectations are not met? When life deviates from our expectations, we often feel abandoned or unprotected. Perhaps you have gone through the agony of losing a career, seeing a marriage break apart, or confronting a major medical issue. It's natural to wonder at such times if you really are under heavenly protection. After all, why would these evil things happen if God is shielding you? Why would you find yourself left to suffer? Though it guides us through it and guarantees that even in the worst of times we are being formed and ready for something better, heavenly protection does not always shield us from suffering or difficulty. Consider this. God does not always clear our pathways. Just as a parent does not shield their kid from every hardship, so too knowledge of adversities helps us develop. Rather, He walks with us over them, giving us the fortitude and will we need to go on. The protection is in the promise that we will not be engulfed in suffering, not in avoiding it. Though we may not know why we are going through certain challenges, over time we can usually look back and realize how those same hardships were essential in determining who we are now. They developed us compassion, intelligence, and strength. They got us ready for the gifts that were to arrive. Furthermore, crucial is the realization that heavenly protection usually manifests itself as preventive measure. Have you ever found yourself rushing late for something crucial only to discover later that the path you would have chosen was the scene of an accident or another perilous situation? Being delayed in the present seems annoying and disruptive, but what if that delay was really a kind of protection? A means of shielding you from injury? Many legends abound of individuals almost missing tragedies due to apparently little delays or alterations in course of events. These events serve to remind us that what we seem to be tragedy or inconvenience might really be God's means of shielding us from something far worse. Stories of persons who, by chance and unanticipated occurrences, escaped being there during catastrophic catastrophes or disasters are among the most potent illustrations of this form of protection. One lady missed a trip when she was caught in traffic. She subsequently found out the aircraft crashed. She was angry and disturbed at the time. But in retrospect, she saw that what seemed to be an awful collection of circumstances was really divine intervention. These are the times when we realize, even if we are not conscious of it, exactly how closely we are under observation. But divine protection does not necessarily entail circumstances of life or death. Sometimes it's about shielding our hearts and brains from things that can spiritually or emotionally harm us. Consider the connections that fell short. It may have seemed at the moment like the end of the world. If God was really guarding you, you may have questioned why He would let you go through such heartache. But with time, you probably started to realize that the relationship wasn't working for you. Perhaps the relationship was keeping you from reaching your full potential. Or maybe the individual mistreated you with the respect and affection you deserved. Though it's difficult to understand it in the time, frequently what seems like rejection is really heavenly protection masquerading under another name. God's protection sometimes is about clearing the road ahead of us, eliminating challenges we are not even aware exist. Other times it's about arming ourselves with the will to overcome challenges required for our development. Though at the moment we may not always see it as protection, looking back makes the indicators obvious. You did not land the job you so much wanted for a reason. Relationship did not work out for a reason. You were sent down a different road for a purpose, even if you were very confident the one you were following was the correct one. Not a promise of a flawless, pain-free existence is divine protection. We are never alone. Hence, anything we go through promises something. It's the knowledge that our life has a purpose, and even if we cannot see the whole picture, we may believe that we are being pointed towards something greater. The path may be challenging, and we will surely have times when we feel abandoned or lost. Though we cannot know how, at such times we have to hang on to the hope that we are still being safeguarded. One further way this protection shows itself is as spiritual clarity. Have you ever found yourself really perplexed, uncertain of what to do or where to look next? Then all of a sudden you felt calm or a flash of insight that enabled you to decide what to do. Another kind of heavenly protection is the capacity to see clearly when doubt clouds the road ahead. If the remainder of the road is still veiled, it seems as if God briefly removes the veil to let you see the next step. That clarity is a blessing, a kind of defense that guarantees we stay mostly on the road we are supposed to follow. Remember that the effectiveness of divine protection depends on our not always requiring to know the how or the why of it. Faith is simply believing, even when we cannot see it, that protection is there. It's about realizing, even in the time, there is a reason behind the events we go through. It's also about realizing we are not traveling through life alone ourselves regardless of what we encounter. So pause going ahead to consider your life. Search for the maybe overlooked indicators of heavenly protection. Consider the instances you were spared from a potentially much worse scenario. Think on the connections that broke off, the doors that closed, and the chances lost. Suppose they were directives rather than rejections. What if, all along, you were under protection from things intended for someone else, things that might have hurt you? You will start to observe these indicators more often the more receptive you are to them. Knowing that you are never really alone can help you to discover a great feeling of serenity and thankfulness as well. Higher power, a heavenly presence watching over you, guiding you, and guaranteeing that, no matter what happens, you are precisely where you are intended to be, protects you. We should be aware that this protection is not always instantaneous or clear as we keep discovering how divine protection shows itself in our life. Learning to rely on this protection, even if we cannot see or feel it in the moment, is really one of the toughest components of faith. When life is running precisely as we had anticipated or planned, it is simple to believe that we are being guarded. What then happens when things break apart? What about those times of intense suffering, uncertainty, or loss when it seems as if the same power we thought was keeping an eye on us has abandoned us? Though these are also the times when supernatural protection is most evident, they are the ones that most test our faith. Though we cannot see it, these uncertain and challenging times are helping us to be formed, directed, and ready for what comes ahead. Still, this is not always simple to swallow. Human beings by nature want for stability and ease. We like to think that if we live in line with spiritual values, if we pray, if we are good, we will be spared suffering. The truth is, however, that adversity is unavoidable in life and heavenly protection does not always save us from it. Rather, it guides us through it so that we come out on the other side wiser, stronger, and more in line with our actual calling. Imagine for a minute a point in your life when things did not go as expected. Perhaps it was a job you turned down, a romance that broke off suddenly, or a goal unrealized. Right at that, it most likely felt terrible. Particularly if you had been working so hard to get a certain result, you may have wondered why this was happening to you. Looking back, however, can you see how that circumstance was really benefiting you? Though it didn't seem like it at the time, can you identify the ways in which you were being sheltered? Many individuals find the process of realizing divine protection to be something they do in retrospect. Often the wider picture is only visible to us after we have gone through a challenging event and emerged from it. Some actions or situations that felt unjust or unpleasant at the time clearly were really moving us towards something greater. This is the core of divine protection. It provides what we need over time rather than necessarily what we desire right now. One striking illustration of this is in the sphere of relationships. Whether a sexual connection, a friendship, or even a familial tie, many of us have gone through the agony of a relationship ending. Following such a loss, it is common for one to feel as if we have been left defenseless or abandoned. Given our belief that the connection was supposed to be, we may ask why God would let us experience such suffering. But when we grow and heal and get perspective, we frequently find that the end of that connection was really a kind of protection. Maybe the relationship was toxic, or maybe it was keeping us from developing into the person we were supposed to be. Perhaps the relationship was keeping us from following our actual calling, or perhaps the other person lacked the love and respect we were due. Whatever the cause, the breakup of the relationship was a means of opening the road for something greater rather than a punishment or a failing mark. And sometimes that something better is not even another relationship. It may be a closer relationship with ourselves, a fresh feeling of freedom, or a chance to concentrate on our own development. In this sense, heavenly protection is about directing us toward what is ultimately best for our spiritual and emotional well-being, rather than about necessarily avoiding suffering. This idea of protection by loss or pain transcends partnerships. It covers many spheres of life, including personal aspirations, health, and employment. Consider a period, for instance, when you were striving toward a particular goal, a promotion at work, the completion of a creative endeavor, or a significant life event. You sacrificed, you worked hard, and yet for some reason things didn't go as planned. That seemed like a failure at the moment. You could have wondered if you were really being directed and sheltered, or whether you were really on your own, against the odds. But suppose that setback were really a kind of defense? What if the job you missed would have sent you on a road not in line with your actual calling? What if the failed endeavor was getting you ready for even more success down road? If the delay or diversion were precisely what you needed to develop, learn, and become the person you were destined to be? The beauty of divine protection is that it provides what we need for the road ahead, rather than always providing what we desire in the here next. It guarantees that we are always headed toward our greatest good, even if the road is challenging. It develops us in ways we may not really know until long later. Realizing divine protection requires us to learn to let go of our craving for control among other crucial elements. Humans often want to regulate every element of our life, including our relationships, jobs, and future ambitions. We want to think that we can prevent suffering, disappointment if we work hard enough, arrange well enough, and make the correct decisions. The reality is, however, life does not always follow such pattern. There are forces beyond our reach. Sometimes the same things we are clinging to are the ones we must let go to experience actual development and protection. Here is where faith finds application. Faith is about believing that, even in cases of ignorance of the reason for anything, there is a larger scheme at operation. It's about realizing we are being directed and shielded even if our road forward is unknown. It's about letting go of our desire for control and letting ourselves be vulnerable knowing we will be looked for. Spiritual development is mostly dependent on vulnerability. Let us let ourselves be vulnerable. Thus, we expose ourselves to the chance of divine intervention. We admit that we have not all the answers. Hence, we ask God to lead us. This does not imply we lose up on our aspirations or stop striving toward our objectives. Rather, it means that we approach life with an openness to the unexpected, a readiness to be directed, and a confidence that even if events do not go as planned, we are still being sheltered. Think of the narrative of someone who finds their employment suddenly lost. Right then, it seems like a catastrophe. They might believe they have failed, or that they are being punished for a transgression. But supposing that job loss is really a kind of protection? What if the world is guiding them toward a fresh chance more in line with their actual intent? What if losing that employment allows them to follow a desire or passion they have been postponing for years? Though it is not always obvious in the moment, this kind of protection becomes evident with time. It calls for trust, patience, and a readiness to let go of the need for quick responses. It calls on us to believe that we are being led towards something greater even while we are negotiating the worst of circumstances. Still, another important component of divine protection is how it increases our resilience. Many times, the protection we get is about arming ourselves with the will to bear adversity rather than with avoiding it. It's about developing our ability to meet obstacles with grace and bravery, knowing that we are being led and supported at every stage. Though it doesn't eliminate the storm, this form of defense helps us to negotiate it. Consider the individuals you most respect, those who have overcome major obstacles in their life and have come out stronger and more sympathetic as a result. Their tales are hardly ones of a seamless, simple existence. Rather, these are tales of resiliency, of conquering difficulty, of finding strength within conflict. These folks are living models of divine protection, not because they were spared suffering, but rather because they were given the will to transcend it. This sort of protection is sometimes disregarded as it does not conform to our conventional definition of what it entails to be guarded. Though genuine protection is about arming ourselves with the skills we need to negotiate life's obstacles, we want to think that protection means avoiding suffering completely. It's about making sure we have the fortitude, faith, and inner power to keep forward regardless of our circumstances. Divine protection is ultimately about development, harmony with our greater purpose, not just safety or security. It's about believing that we are being led towards something better even among suffering or uncertainty. It's also about realizing that the protection we get is the sort that gets us ready to gracefully, bravely, and with faith confront whatever comes our way, not necessarily the kind that keeps us safe. One of the toughest obstacles we face when we delve further into how divine protection influences our life is the requirement of patience. The concept of waiting, especially waiting for something we cannot see or completely understand, can be unpleasant and irritating in a society where we are frequently preoccupied with quick outcomes and rapid pleasure. The fact is, however, that God's plan's timetable is not always in line with our own, and so divine protection sometimes calls for us to have patience. The adage, God's delays are not God's denials, captures the truth that sometimes what seems like a delay or a setback is really part of a far larger plan, one we cannot yet comprehend. Remember that divine protection is about leading us toward what is beneficial for us in the long term as much as about shielding us from immediate danger. This implies that even if we are impatient for responses or results, there are times when we must wait, trust, and let events play out in their own time. In this view, patience is not about waiting passively for anything to come about. It's about consciously thinking that movement is occurring under the surface even when things seem to be motionless. The work of divine protection often occurs behind the scenes in ways we cannot immediately perceive, just as a seed needs time to develop under the ground before it emerges. It is common to feel as if nothing is occurring, or that we have been forgotten during these moments. Actually, however, God is still working, still directing, and still shielding us throughout those waiting times. The narrative of those who have waited years, sometimes decades, for certain prayers to be answered or for specific desires to be fulfilled is among the most potent illustrations of this. They often face obstacles, disappointments, and defeats, testing their faith in the meantime. For those who are still tenacious and patient, nevertheless, the understanding finally dawns that the delay was not a sign of desertion or a penalty. Rather, it was a vital component of the process that let them develop, mature, and become the person they needed to be in order to completely welcome and appreciate what was about to arrive. Consider a young individual hoping to be a great artist. Though year after year they strive to earn their big break, they have all the skill and enthusiasm in the world. They experience many rejections, financial challenges, and periods of uncertainty along the road. Despite their diligence and effort, they might find it perplexing why their prayers for success appear to go unacknowledged. What they may not know, however, is that these years of difficulty are really getting them ready for something much more than they could have dreamed. Maybe over these years they are growing not just in their creative ability, but also in their perseverance, humility, and ability to gracefully manage success. When their major break at last arrives, they are ready in terms of character as much as skill. Though it takes more time than we expected, this is the core of divine protection. It guarantees that we are ready for the gifts that are coming. Divine protection is therefore sometimes about timing. It is about when it occurs as much as what happens. Sometimes we push ourselves to the limit, attempting to compel events to follow our own schedule, so totally consumed with reaching a certain objective or end. But sometimes, in His perfect knowledge, God knows we are not yet ready for what we are requesting. He understands that we may not be able to manage, or completely appreciate that benefit if we received it too soon. He so shields us in His grace by postponing the realization of that dream until we are quite ready for it. Particularly in the middle of waiting, this type of protection might be difficult to embrace. It calls on us to let go of our demand for control and believe that our workplace has a more grand scheme. It calls on us to see the delays we encounter as chances for development rather than roadblocks. It also calls on us to believe that everything will eventually align in the manner it is supposed to. Another way divine protection shows itself is by our pathways being redirected. Sometimes we become so preoccupied with a certain aim or want that we overlook other chances or alternatives right before us. We could be so focused on one thing working that we overlook the signals God is attempting to guide us in another direction, one that is more fit for our talents, our mission, and our well-being. Consider the instances in your life when things went off course and you discovered you were on a far different road than the one you had first imagined. It may have initially seemed like a letdown or a failure. You could have questioned why your prayers went unanswered or why, despite your best efforts, everything appeared to be falling apart. Looking back, however, can you see how that redirection was really a kind of protection? Can you see how God was moving you toward a door leading to something much more by shutting one? Though it is frequently subtle and easy to overlook in the moment, with time and perspective this form of protection becomes evident. The employment offer that passed through was just for a greater possibility a few months later. It's the relationship that didn't work out. It creates space for a connection much more in line with your spirit and ideals. Originally frightening and unknown, the relocation to a new city finally resulted in fresh friendships, chances, and personal development. These times call for a development of mindfulness and thankfulness. Thanks helps us to see the ways in which, even in cases of unanticipated events, we are being shielded. It turns our attention from what we have lost or failed to work out to the gifts that are showing up in our life. And mindfulness helps us remain present, enabling us to perceive the indicators of divine protection in the here and now, rather than lost in our concerns about the future or our regrets about the past. Approaching life with thankfulness and awareness helps us to see that divine protection is not something that only occurs in spectacular or transforming events. This is something that occurs constantly in the smallest and most normal events of our everyday life. You missed a collision on the highway because of the non-starting automobile. This buddy calls out of the blue just when you were feeling down or alone. Remind yourself that everything is going to be okay by the unexpected sense of calm that sweeps over you among turmoil. These are the times when we perceive the invisible hand of grace always at work in our life. They are reminders that while we cannot see it, we are constantly being directed and sheltered. We are never really alone. Realizing heavenly protection is one of the toughest difficulties, as it often calls for us to let go of our preconceptions of how things should. Everybody has notions about what their life should be like, what objectives they should reach, and what schedules they should follow. But heavenly protection usually operates outside of these bounds. It doesn't always line up with our expectations, as God's will is much more vast and far-reaching than anything we could ever conceive. This is the place the idea of surrender finds application. Surrender is not about giving up or cowering oneself into a passive existence. Rather, it's about letting go of our attachment to certain results and believing that whatever occurs, of course, is a part of a greater, divinely directed design. It's about realizing that we don't know everything, and that sometimes letting go and letting ourselves be led in a new path is the best kind of defense. Surrendering to divine protection calls for confidence as much as faith. Entering the unknown, choosing a road less traveled, and believing we are being guided towards something better calls for bravery. Letting rid of our demand for certainty and control and embracing the wonder of life calls both bravery. When we do, however, we expose ourselves to the chance for great development and metamorphosis. Reminding ourselves of the times in the past when we have been led and sheltered in ways we did not really grasp at the time might aid us in uncertain times. Reflecting on these events helps us to deepen our faith and confidence in the process, as it assures us that even if the road forward is unknown, we are being cared for. Divine protection is ultimately about believing that, even on a tough road, we are constantly being directed toward what is best for us, not about avoiding difficulties or pain. It's about realizing we are a part of a greater design that is developing in ways we cannot often see or grasp. And it's about having the faith to believe that, even in the tiniest and most everyday events of our life, we are always being guarded regardless of what transpires. It's important to consider the larger spiritual ramifications of living under the cover of a higher power as we approach the last section of our examination of divine protection. By now, we have discussed how divine protection shows itself both in ways we can see and in ways frequently concealed from our direct awareness. We have discussed timeliness, patience, fortitude, and surrender. Still another level to explore, however, is how divine protection links us to a greater, worldwide design in addition to influencing our own life. Our spiritual protection is about orienting us toward our best purpose and guiding us toward our position in the larger spiritual terrain of the earth, not just about keeping us safe in a physical sense. Especially while we are in the face of daily challenges, this more general spiritual goal might be difficult to understand. It's easy to forget that we are part of something much more than ourselves when we get so preoccupied with our own issues, our jobs, our relationships, our health. But heavenly protection helps us to realize that we are never really alone. We are a part of a much bigger narrative that affects the life of countless people in ways we may never completely know and beyond our own life. One of the most important features of divine protection is this connection. It is not just about shielding each of us personally, but also about directing us in ways that enable us to play our part in the greater spiritual fabric of the planet. The individuals we encounter along the road help us to see one of the ways this connectivity shows itself. We meet fresh individuals throughout our lives. Some linger for a lifetime, some just pass through. Still, many times these folks are part of our heavenly protection. They enter our life at just the right time and provide knowledge, encouragement, or even difficulties that enable us to develop in ways we would not be able to in-house. Sometimes the kind remark from a stranger gets us through a difficult day. Other times it's a profound, lifetime connection that offers the emotional and spiritual support required to keep on the road of our greatest good. Think about the links in your own life. Of the persons you know right now, how many entered your life in seeming random or unexpected manner? How many times have you turned around and discovered that meeting a certain individual was a moment of divine alignment rather than chance? Whether they enter our life for a season or for a lifetime, these individuals are often tools of heavenly protection. They are here for a purpose. They assist to advise, encourage, and challenge us in ways that will enable us to flourish. It goes beyond only the folks who stand by our side as well. Sometimes part of this supernatural protection are the ones who test us, push us to our boundaries, or even injure us. Especially in the middle of conflict or suffering, this might be difficult to believe. Still, frequently the difficult connections are the ones that help us grow personally. They compel us to grow limits, face our own shortcomings, or understand the need of compassion and pardon. This allows even the challenging people in our life to be part of our heavenly protection, thereby guiding us into better, wiser, and more compassionate people. The notion of community also clearly shows the idea of heavenly protection reaching via others. Walking this spiritual road alone ourselves is not our intended path. Whether it's a family, a gathering of friends, a spiritual congregation, or even a more worldwide movement, we are supposed to be members of a community. Reminding us that we are a part of something more than ourselves, these groups help us to find connection and a feeling of belonging. Our communities frequently provide the security and encouragement needed to remain ahead of disaster or adversity. Consider the periods in your life when you were facing really trying circumstances. The folks who got you through it were who? Who was by your side providing consolation, support, or useful help? These individuals were tools of divine protection, positioned in your life at just the right time to assist you through that specific difficulty, not merely out of their own compassion. And just as you have been the receiver of this sort of protection, you have most certainly been a tool for divine protection for others. Not recognizing at the time that you were serving as a vehicle for supernatural protection in their life, there have most likely been moments when you provided someone in need assistance, knowledge, or even just a listening ear. This is one of the most lovely features of divine protection. It is not a one-way road. It connects us to others in a network of mutual support and compassion, both path forward. Each of us belongs to a greater spiritual ecology in which the protection we get reflects the protection we provide to others. This connectivity reminds us that, even in our worst of times, we are never really alone. Whether we acknowledge it or not, someone is always there to provide support, someplace. Furthermore, crucial for divine protection is how it helps us to connect with our actual calling. Everybody has a different goal in this planet and a cause for being here that transcends daily chores and obligations. This goal is usually related to our spiritual gifts, that which we were born with, those skills, interests, and abilities. Divine protection is about directing us toward the achievement of this mission, rather than just about shielding us from danger. Sometimes we may not know exactly why we are here. We can be lost or doubtful about our path forward. However, divine protection guarantees that, even in cases when we lack all the knowledge, we are being directed toward the proper road for us. This might show up as chances that present themselves or as closed doors that keep us from veering from the correct road. In any case, even if we are not quite clear about what that ultimate goal is, divine protection is always striving to line us with it. Consider the moments in your life when you were pulled toward something, perhaps a profession, a creative endeavor, or a relationship, only to discover that things did not go as planned. Right then, it may have seemed like a setback or a failure. Looking back, however, can you see how that experience guided you towards something better, something more in line with your actual calling? This is the act of heavenly protection, softly guiding us back onto the road designed for us. Particularly when we are strongly tied to a certain end or goal, this redirection is not always simple to embrace. Part of living under divine protection, however, is learning to believe that, even when events deviate from our expectations, there is a greater design at work, one that eventually serves our best. We have to be ready to let go of our own expectations and believe in the wisdom of the cosmos. Hence, this calls for a degree of humility and surrender. Surrendering to divine protection does not entail resigning from our aspirations or desires. Rather, it means being receptive to the notion that there may be another path to fulfill those aspirations, one that better fits our spiritual direction. It implies being ready to let go of the urge to run every element of our life and trust a higher force to lead us. This sort of yielding is about active faith, not about passivity. It's about realizing we are being guided towards something better even if we cannot see the whole picture. When we are confronted with difficult or terrible events, this process of surrender may be very demanding. It might be difficult to believe that we are being shielded while we are in the middle of suffering, that of a personal crisis, a significant life transition, or a death of a loved one. These times naturally cause one to wonder why we are going through such suffering and whether the very entity we thought was keeping an eye on us has abandoned us. But divine protection does not imply that all suffering will be avoided. It implies that we are being directed and helped in ways we may not quite grasp even in our worst hours. Development of inner strength is one way this direction shows itself. Divine protection is about helping us build the emotional, mental, and spiritual strength we need to negotiate the demands of life, not just about keeping us physically safe. One of the best blessings of divine protection is this resilience, which helps us to meet difficulty with faith, grace, and bravery. Consider the individuals in your life who have overcome major obstacles, sickness, grief, or personal struggle, and come out the other side stronger and more sympathetic. These people are living models of heavenly protection in action. Though they have not been exempt from suffering, they have been given the will to bear it. Therefore, they have turned into sources of inspiration and hope for others. Usually stemming from challenging events, this kind of inner strength is developed over time. Though it is not something we are born with, we grow to have faith and endurance as we negotiate the demands of life. Divine protection guarantees that we are never given more than we can manage regardless of our circumstances. Though at times it may seem overwhelming, we are always armed with the skills needed to go through it. Expanding our spiritual awareness is another manner heavenly protection aids in our development. We are asked to develop continually as we traverse life.